Welcome to the Power Trends podcast, produced by the New York Independent System Operator, where we discuss energy planning, public policy, and other issues affecting New York's power grid.
Welcome back to the NYISO's Power Trends podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Lanahan, and today we're joined once again by Zach Smith, our Senior Vice President of System and Resource Planning, a familiar voice and guest to our listeners. Zach and his planning team are at the forefront of analyzing the complex data that helps forecast the impact of increasing demand and other major changes on the grid. The planning team's work is essential to understanding the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead with the grid in transition. It's also critical to maintaining system reliability, and that's what we're going to focus on today in our discussion with Zach. In this episode, Zach will break down for us two recent reliability reports. First, the Comprehensive Reliability Plan, or CRP. Next, the quarterly short-term assessment of reliability, the third quarter short-term assessment of reliability, or what we call the STAR. Together, these two studies are revealing that New York's approaching a pivotal moment in ensuring we have enough electricity to meet future demand as soon as next year. And from aging generation, the impact of new large load projects like data centers and semiconductor manufacturing, to the impact of extreme weather, pace of electrification in New York, the path forward for our grid in transition is proving anything but simple. Zach's going to help us break this down. We'll explore the key findings of these two reports, understand reliability deficiencies that are identified in New York City and Long Island in the next few years. We're also going to cover the important role of large-scale renewable projects like the Champlain Hudson Power Express, and generally the importance and what it really means by an all-of-the-above approach to ensuring grid reliability. So let's dive into the data, the takeaways, and the future direction of our energy future with Zach Smith. Zach, welcome, and thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Great to be here. Happy to discuss these important issues.
So when we issued the Comprehensive Reliability Plan, we said the grid is at an inflection point. Those are the words in the plan that we've highlighted when we posted the plan, and that there are three major trends bringing us to that inflection point. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Really, there's so many moving pieces right now in the world that affect the grid and the reliability of the grid that we're responsible for planning for. And as you mentioned, we feel that we're at an inflection point, and it's driven by a number of factors. We have an aging fleet. In New York, our generation fleet is in fact the oldest in the country. And with age comes uncertainty and outages and retirements. And we see that the pace of those generator retirements, deactivations, and failures, that pace is accelerating, and especially relative to the pace of new resources that are coming onto the grid. So that alone causes us concern that we're losing resources from the system, not gaining new resources fast enough. But then on the other side of the equation, so to speak, demand is also increasing. And there's a few different aspects of that demand. One is, we have historically been a summer peaking system. We still are a summer peaking system, but we forecast that sometime in the next 10 years, we will at least become what we might call a dual peaking system, where both winter and summer are of a concern. And that leads to new reliability challenges. And then that coupled with just new demand growth, especially driven by building electrification of transportation, but also, of course, what's in the news a lot nowadays, data centers, new large loads, microchip fabrication, anything industrial. We see a lot of that coming to New York, which, of course, for the economy is great, but it does create challenges for us on the electric grid. So when you put all of this together, it's rapidly eating into any surplus margin that we have on the grid, and that's the message that we wanted to get out in this CRP.
Let's dig into a little bit that aging fleet issue. So several thousand megawatts, between 50 and even beyond 70 years old. When is it just the age, or what comes with the age that we're worried about, and that we're going to start thinking about more from a data point of view going forward?
Any machinery that you might have that you're familiar with, it wears down over time. And that is just a fact of life, no matter what it is that we're talking about. And so it's true for power plants as well. As they age, of course, there's significant maintenance that's done throughout their lifetime. But at some point, there's a greater and greater likelihood as they age that those plants are either going to be on an outage more often, just outright fail, or just that it doesn't make as much economic sense for the plant owner to continue to operate that very old plant. And so for those variety of factors, we did quite a bit of research leading into this CRP to kind of guide our thinking. And that research shows that, yes, in the next 10 years, that several thousand megawatts of generation of the New York fleet is at risk for not being available to us in these next 10 years based on some of this age-based statistical analysis. So what does that mean? What we are proposing is going forward to take that into consideration in our planning. Our reliability planning today, in one way, we take a careful approach in terms of what new resources we plan for. We plan for new resources once we're relatively confident that they're going to move forward. But on the flip side, for existing resources, we are quite optimistic, quite frankly. We assume that all existing resources continue to exist for the next 10 years. And frankly, our research shows that that's highly unlikely. And we think that it's appropriate now to take action to change our planning process to better reflect this likely outcome in the next 10 years.
Let's focus on what the biggest reliability risks are. And since we're in the season of winter, the CRP looks out, as you said, 10 years. What do we see happening with the move towards a winter peaking system and some of the new reliability risks and concerns that you've identified in this report?
Certainly one unique reliability challenge in winter that we would not face in summer is the limitation of gas supply. So natural gas is used to fuel many of the power plants on our system, and it's also used to fuel heating for homes and businesses throughout New York. Well, on the coldest days, heating gets priority for that gas. And so if there is insufficient supply or a constraint on the gas pipeline system, well, then that could lead to a shortfall in fuel that's available to the power plants to maintain reliability of the grid during those coldest days, during a cold snap. And that is exactly our concern as we move towards a winter peaking system. While the winter peak itself, for now, is lower than summer peak, really, when we're talking about a dual peaking system, the concern is that we face different challenges in summer and winter, and we need to consider all of those challenges to keep the lights on for all New Yorkers.
So talk to us about these different scenarios that you're running, the added challenge of accounting for that uncertainty and the variability, and why that gives you, there's some comfort in running the several scenarios to identify the plausible outcomes, but there's also some concern with some of the outcomes that we're seeing in those scenarios. So walk us through that.
The approach in the past, the historical approach, has been basically that we have one single set of assumptions for the next 10 years, as if we have a perfect crystal ball of exactly what the future holds. And it served us well until now, where we've had sufficient surplus on the system, we've had sufficient margins on the system, that a little bit of uncertainty around any assumption, we'd be able to manage around that. Our operators would be able to manage around that. Well, we're at a point now, this inflection point, where I just believe that that's not the case anymore. I don't think it's safe for us to look at one single set of assumptions. So what we have put forward in our comprehensive reliability plan this year, recommendations that we pursue planning for, as you described, plausible futures. And really what that means is taking a closer look in an open and transparent way with our stakeholders to think about where might the demand forecast go? What might the resource mix look like? What might be the system conditions that we'll face in the future? And it's highly unlikely that there's one single answer to any of those questions. And so our idea is to move forward with planning for a range of plausible futures. And in doing so, we will work very closely with our stakeholders to determine an appropriate process through which we could identify reliability needs through those plausible futures. But in my opinion, the kind of work that we've done in the past that basically was for information only, we need to take the next step and to now be really using that information to make important decisions for the reliability of the grid.
One of the other major responsibilities you and your group has is administering, overseeing, running the interconnection process. We had roughly 4,000 megawatts of what we call large loads. These are major energy users that want to connect to the grid. We had about 4,000 megawatts in 2024. We're well beyond that now. I think these numbers are accurate. Around 6,500 megawatts towards the end of this summer, growing to 8,000, 8,500 megawatts by the end of October. Now we're approaching 11,000 megawatts. We may be beyond that as we speak now. Is that one of those major factors that's impacting your ability to forecast demand going forward? And the plausible outcomes really are necessary when you consider that kind of load growth.
Without question. And, to give a sense for our listeners who may not be as familiar with some of the numbers, I mean, our total peak demand right now is on the scale of maybe 33,000 megawatts. So when we're talking about possibly adding another 10,000 megawatts of large loads potentially, that's enormous. That's a huge shift from how we know the grid today. And so to your question, Kevin, what we have to wrestle with is, well, how much of it is actually going to come about? Because, of course, rightfully so, these businesses come forward to us with requests to evaluate what the impact may be. But that doesn't mean that they're definitively moving forward with that project. Not every single project moves forward. So we have to assess with all of these large load requests that we've received that right now are in excess of 10,000 megawatts, how much of that should we plan for to take into account what effect does that have on the overall reliability of the grid. And I think it's important to point out that we do also separately have, you mentioned our interconnection process. Many are familiar with our generator interconnection process. These large loads also have to go through an interconnection process. We're involved in evaluating their reliability impact in what's called a system impact study. And then further study work is handed over to the utilities for them to evaluate final interconnection issues. And so each large load is evaluated for its own reliability impact, but we also have to take into account the comprehensive view of the impact all of them have on the system and all of these different moving parts, basically, for the reliability of the grid.
An added complexity and challenge for you and your group. You're not modeling in every last megawatt of the roughly 11,000, but you have to, that those are possible. So you have to try and account for that in some way. And I know that you and your group have this added challenge of trying to determine what's viable and what's not. It's part of what we're considering in terms of how to shift and change the interconnection process. But when we are talking to these developers, what are some of the different things that you and your group are raising in the planning work with these developers to understand if they are viable going forward?
Yeah, we have conversations with pretty much every single of these load developers that come forward, and the purpose is really to understand the nature of their own plans and their approach and the nature of their facilities. So, it's helpful to understand there may be a big difference with large loads between the day that they energize versus the time when they're actually at full load, what we would call full load. There could be multiple years in between those two dates. And so that certainly has an impact on our system planning. And so we work closely with the loads to understand, well, what is their game plan? Like, what's their strategy in terms of implementing their load? Also, what's the nature of their business? And so some of these facilities may indeed be quite flexible in their ability to reduce, or we'll use the word curtail, to curtail their demand during peak demand times. That certainly is very helpful to the overall grid. Some of what we look to incentivize through our markets, including our distributed energy resource market, our DER market. And so the idea is understand what loads might be flexible, and can we rely on that flexibility of those facilities such that we will not have reliability needs. The flip side of that, there are facilities where, for example, like microchip manufacturing, they require really the utmost level of reliability, where my understanding of how they operate is they operate almost 24/7, maybe not quite, but they operate as basically just constant demand, and they have very little flexibility to reduce demand during those peak times. And so we also have to plan for that. And we have to think about the times when we may be deficient in resources to serve total demand. We also have to think about the times when we may be surplus, and what do we do with that surplus, and how can we manage the balance of everything across the grid.
So I think it's really important, Zach, for folks to understand how you and your team are shifting to meet this moment, and that you're not taking all of those 11,000 megawatts, dumbing it into your planning model and saying, this is absolutely what we have to build, invest, and plan the system for. You're being judicious. You're changing your approach and trying to come up with the best, not only the best scenarios to run, but then the best scrutiny of that data to make sure we get it right.
It's a critically important point, because it would be a lot easier on us if we just decided that, like, you know what, we'll just make the worst case assumptions for everything and we'll call it a day. That would be easier on us, but that wouldn't be the right thing to do. And so we're taking on the tough task of how do we balance all of these different assumptions, all of these different uncertainties for the future, and consider the, as I've said, plausible futures. That's why we use that term. It's not just a paper exercise. It's actually giving thought to what are very plausible futures. And again, the idea is, we put forward these thoughts in the CRP, but going forward to try to implement this in our process, first of all, we need to have extensive conversations with our stakeholders to develop the right process for it. And then as we implement that process, to continue those conversations with our stakeholders, to get their input, get their feedback, and to do this in an open and transparent way so that everyone understands the decisions that are being made, ultimately to what leads to reliability needs being identified.
Okay, so we've focused on winter. It's that season now. It's been rather cold for early mid-December. We've gotten plenty of snow. You talked about some of the concerns and risks going forward. Tell us how this past summer may have influenced the CRP. And then we got to get into the quarterly 3-star, of course, but the takeaways, lessons learned, observations from what was a hotter than what we've experienced for the last decade summer, how the system performed, and how that may have influenced some of the CRP takeaways.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So, the way that it informed our CRP was really to help kind of bolster and support some of the concerns that we already had looking forward into the system. So, for example, you mentioned a lot of the key ones, the weather, the effect of the weather, and the effect that has on demand. So without getting into all the details, we assume certain weather. We just call it expected weather. There's a lot of detail behind that, but let's call it expected weather. And that's what our forecasts are based on. The weather that we assume that we experienced this summer, especially in June, was beyond expected weather. So it's what we would call beyond design conditions. So that alone is something that really tests our operators, and to me is a reason to be concerned and a reason for us to examine some of what we're planning for. But that's just one. Another is the level of generator outages that were experienced during that time frame. When we look at the numbers, it actually aligned pretty closely with some of the recent assumptions that we've made for generator outages. Sometimes that's hard to predict. But as I said, the experience was somewhat confirming. Of course, we would prefer not to have the outages, but if they're going to happen, it was somewhat confirming that the assumptions we're making and planning are appropriate. And then the third aspect, which we've been talking about for a few years now that we're concerned about, is the level to which we rely on our neighbors. We are part of the Eastern Interconnection. It's one of the most amazing machines in the world. The Eastern Interconnection is one single machine. It's the entire eastern half of North America, which on the whole is fantastic. It's because of that one big machine that gives us a lot of the reliability that we have. However, our neighbors are experiencing these same issues that I've summarized here. These are not unique to New York. And so as we're looking into the future, to what level can we count on our neighbors to actually have surplus power that we can import under those strained conditions? When we are experiencing those strained conditions, it's more and more likely that our neighbors are also experiencing those conditions. And so what level to which we should be counting on any excess power coming in from them. And this past summer, again, kind of showed that we did not get much assistance from our neighbors during that strained time. This is something we've been flagging for a few years now, and something we need to examine going forward into what we assume for planning the next 10 years.
So we look at summer of 25, we had aging generation fail to respond when we needed them. We had, as you say, beyond expected weather, which is becoming more expected.
Yeah.
We weren't able to rely on our neighbors because, as you point out, the other regions, the other states are dealing with the same set of dynamics. And we were on the ragged edge of maybe breaking our peak, our historic peak. Behind the meter solar and wind did come in for a little bit and helped there, but the setup here is what we need to do to add generation, because if that in that event in June during the June heat wave, we didn't have that wind and that solar day one, day two. We need some resources to meet this moment, this inflection point, and then the forecasted increases in demand. We have called for in the CRP investments in dispatchable generation, if you want to comment on that for us.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Kevin. And let me emphasize to begin with that, to me, it's got to be an all-in strategy. I welcome every single megawatt we can get. The wind, the solar, energy storage, those all provide some level of reliability, some level of reliable service. But the concern is that in those most strained times, when demand is the highest, the wind may not be blowing at its optimal level, and so we may not get the highest generation out of the wind generation. Solar is mixed, and especially when we start to look at winter, when we're looking at winter demand, the output from solar is going to be very low. And so, we can count on solar during some times, but other times it has less of a contribution. Energy storage provides some help, but it's sort of like a time displacement. You need to still be able to charge that storage at one time in order to discharge it during other times. And there's a time limitation there. So again, it helps. But when you take all of that into consideration, what I just described, it leaves a gap. So it leaves a gap where we need what I would just call conventional generation, dispatchable generation. It's generation that today is provided by fossil. It's not to say that forevermore in the future, it always has to be provided by fossil, but instead it's more about the machinery behind it. We need the attributes that machinery provides. and it gets into some really detailed stuff fast. Spinning mass on the system, inertia, voltage support, frequency response, those kind of things that are highly detailed, but very important to the operation of this machinery that we're a part of. And there are times when wind, solar, and storage cannot provide all of those attributes that we need.
So in simple terms, those attributes, when we say dispatchable, it's being able to draw on those megawatts exactly when we need them based on shifting, sometimes volatile conditions on the system. Could be a storm that pops up that eliminates the ability to grab that behind the meter solar or utility scale solar when you need it.
That's right. Yep.
All right, so let's dig into the third quarter short-term assessment of reliability report that your team also put together. Briefly explain for us what it announced. It has some dire, stark warnings about New York City, Long Island.
Yeah. So I think it would help maybe to level set about, well, what's the purpose of the STAR?
Yeah,
so as
good.
you've mentioned, it's a quarterly report. We do them every single quarter. It's not in response to some event on the system. Every single quarter, we produce a short-term assessment of reliability, a STAR. But its purpose is to look forward 5 years and to think about, well, what changes have happened in those last 3 months that we may need to react to. And oftentimes there are not findings. But the reason you ask about it now, Kevin, is because there were findings in Q3 STAR. And one of the main purposes of the quarterly STAR is to assess generator deactivations. So when any generator on the system seeks to retire or deactivate, there's a few different other versions of deactivation. They're required to give us a 1-year notice. And with that 1-year notice, we then immediately evaluate them in the next STAR study, so the next quarterly STAR that comes up. In this particular STAR, we happen to have a number of deactivation notices that all came forward at the same time. This included a few plants in New York City, a few plants in Long Island. And so the focus quickly became, for the Q3 STAR, the New York City and Long Island area, and what deficiencies might we experience if those plants permanently were removed from the system. And what we found is if they left the grid today or sometime in the next year, and some of our other plans didn't come forward to fruition, we would be deficient. So while, for example, it's good that we talked about the comprehensive reliability plan, the CRP, while it gave some of these warnings, it showed how we would have a reliable system for the next 10 years. But that does count on a number of projects that are underway that are not in service yet. And so in order to have a reliable system, we're planning for those projects to be done. And so in the case of New York City, there's a few different pieces there, but certainly one major one is the Champlain Hudson Power Express. It's under construction now, currently scheduled to go into service in May. But things happen in the construction process of any facility. This wouldn't be if something were to be delayed with Chippy, it wouldn't be unique to Chippy. The delays happen, and that's our concern. Is what if that was delayed? So then we go into the summertime and we don't have Chippy, and what if we also didn't have these power plants? Our calculation showed that we may be short on power in the New York City area. Similarly, in Long Island, when we take into account a number of different things that are being planned for or underway, one of which is the Long Island Public Policy Transmission Project that we selected a little while ago. It's under construction now. That's going to provide tremendous reliability benefit to Long Islanders, but it's not in service yet. And so until it is, there's a concern that Long Island may be deficient as well for some of those plants, if some of those plants on Long Island were to leave. So that's kind of the gist of the concern, is that there's deficiencies in those two areas. And currently we have a solicitation out for solutions. The response is due January 9th. We'll see what answers we get in. Basically, our last resort is to retain deactivating units. If a unit wants to deactivate, we would like to allow it to. And so the purpose of our solicitation is to exhaust all other possibilities, to consider what other options we have, and then make a determination. And we'll make that determination sometime in the first half of 2026.
And just to be specific, when you say short or deficient in New York City, we're talking about next summer, Long Island thereafter.
Correct. Right. And again, because of the demand forecast, the numbers change a little bit through time. But yes, it is as soon as next summer that it becomes a problem. And then the level of the deficiency just changes from year to year, depending on system conditions and what they're projected to be.
Great. So when you say consider all solutions, the last resort would be retention. What, for our listeners, what could be some of those solutions? Different technologies, other different programs, but you'll look at all of that. I just maybe detail that for the listeners.
Yeah. So in the case of these deficiencies, it really could be anything that we deal with. There's three main categories of solutions that we look at. One is generation. So if there's any generation that we're not currently planning on that's coming forward that maybe wasn't on our radar or could be expedited, could be accelerated, we're certainly interested in that. The other is demand. So demand side solutions. Is there more demand response out there? Are there distributed energy resources out there that we're not currently planning for? Are there energy efficiency programs that could be increased by the utilities? Those kind of things are options under the demand side umbrella. And then transmission also in this case could be an option. I'll say right here that it's probably unlikely because oftentimes the lead time for transmission solutions is quite long. But nevertheless, the nature of these deficiencies, they could be addressed with additional transmission to move power from somewhere else in the New York grid into these deficient areas.
So you were talking about lead times with transmission. We know it's much longer than generation, but you talked to, and you mentioned earlier how much interaction you have with industry representatives and other researchers, frankly, that look at the industry. And so what are we hearing about the lead times these days for that new generation if ideally we were bringing more efficient capacity, more clean capacity onto the system?
It's a fantastic question. It's a concern in the industry right now due to supply chain constraints. The lead time we're hearing is at least 5 years for new significant generation, and it possibly could be quite longer. I mentioned at some point how we're not the only ones experiencing these concerns. Our counterparts across the country, they have generator developers as well. They have generator developers that are taking steps to pursue new generation. And so from what I've heard is on the supply chain side, the demand for new generation has really increased. And there's only so much that can get manufactured over a period of time. And so I anticipate that that's going to lead to constraints that if we in New York are facing a need for new generation, we need to know about that as soon as possible to give ourselves enough time and to give generator developers enough time to pursue those facilities in light of some of these supply chain constraints.
I think that's a good place to pause for now. I'll say pause because we continue to bring you back here. And I just want to thank you, Zach. As we've heard today, the path to a reliable grid is complex, it's technical. We also have to consider the practical implications of what the CRP has identified. And a big thank you to you, your team, for the work you do in keeping the system reliable, identifying these issues as we move forward as a state. But thanks again for joining us, helping us unpack these difficult details. And for our listeners, if you'd like to dive deeper into the quarterly STAR, or the Comprehensive Reliability Plan reports, please visit our website, NYISO.com, a wealth of information there. And please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Zach, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it. Until next time.
Thank you, Kim. Happy to be here.
Thanks for listening to the Power Trends podcast.
Thank you for joining us. As a reminder, the New York Independent System Operator, NYISO for short, is responsible for reliably managing New York's power grid and energy markets and providing independent data to policymakers and the public. For more independent info, please visit the NYISO blog at www.nyiso.com/blog.